A very good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Singapore Pavilion's Food Day program as part of the Adaptation and Resilience Day. I am Marlene from the Singapore Food Agency, and I'm delighted to share with you our third program today, co-organized by Good Food Institute. Good Food Institute is the leading alternative protein think tank in Asia. And today's panel titled APAC-Brazil, Enabling Ecosystems for Food Innovation. And this panel addresses a fundamental truth. There is no pathway to decarbonization without imagining food production. And today, we'll explore how different countries have leveraged their unique strengths to collectively accelerate future-proof protein production. Alternative proteins have the potential to cut meat industry emission by up to 98%, making them crucial climate solutions. From Singapore's pioneering regulatory approvals and world-class research facilities like the Basel Center for Sustainable Protein, to China's integration of alternative protein into national agricultural plans, to Brazil's corporate investments in plant-based innovations, we'll examine the policies and partnerships driving this transformation. Moderating this session is Ms. Mirte Gosker, Chief Executive Officer of Good Food Institute APAC, who will guide our exploration of cross-regional collaboration in building this climate-resilient food system. Ms. Gosker, please.
Hello, everybody. As Marlene, where is she? There. Just said, my name is Mirte Gosker, and I'm the CEO of the GFI APAC, Asia's leading alternative protein think tank, and we are proudly headquartered in Singapore. It's an honor to be joined today by such an esteemed international panel of experts to talk about enabling ecosystems for food innovation. Just to set the stage for this conversation, I want to start by hitting you with a stark reality, directly from the pages of the prestigious journal Science. Food production alone will be enough to put the Paris climate goals out of reach, even if all other major sources of emissions are closed down. Read that again. Even if, and that is a big if, the world manages to resolve all of our urgent challenges on energy, transportation, and other major sources of emissions, humanity will still fall short on our global climate goals if we do not rethink how we produce food. This is due in large part to the extreme inefficiency of cycling food through farmed animals. According to the World Resources Institute, conventional meat production requires feeding up to 100 calories to a cow to create just 1 calorie of beef. Even producing chicken, the most efficient animal, requires feeding 9 calories of feed to a bird only to get 1 calorie back as meat. That's like serving 9 bowls of rice and throwing 8 of them out in the trash every time we sit down for dinner. Because of meat's inherent inefficiencies, agricultural land use change is now the largest contributor to global deforestation and the single biggest driver of wildlife displacement. Currently, 3/4 of all agricultural land is used to grow crops, to feed to chickens and pigs, or to graze cows and other farmed animals. For perspective, that's a land mass more than twice the size of China and India combined. As if that weren't enough, most of the soybeans fed to farmed animals in China and other fast-growing Asian countries are imported from right here, Brazil, directly fueling the deforestation that China, Indonesia, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, and more than 100 other countries have publicly pledged to end over the next 5 years. Now imagine how much more land, water, and other finite sources will be required if global meat consumption rises by another 50% by 2050, as the FAO has projected. Put simply, a collision between consumer demand and our planetary limits is inevitable if we do not radically change the math. At GFI, we believe the most effective way to do this is not to beg consumers to stop eating meat, but to upgrade the way meat is made. By harnessing protein directly from its biological source, from plants or cultivated directly from animal cells, producers can slash meat's greenhouse gas emissions by up to 98%. Alternative proteins can also reduce agricultural land and water use by up to 96 and 99%, thereby boosting food resilience and transforming scarcity into abundance. But you don't have to take my word for it. In its groundbreaking 2024 report titled Recipe for a Livable Planet, the World Bank provides the most comprehensive global roadmap to date on how to mitigate agri-food emissions and reach net zero by 2050. The authors ranked 26 of the agri-food sector's most promising emission mitigation interventions and found alternative proteins ranked first for climate mitigation potential among agri-food interventions. Across all agriculture, forestry, and other land use interventions, only reforestation did better. In fact, alternative proteins have 9 times more mitigation potential than the next most promising intervention to improve meat production, which is improved ruminant feed digestibility. Similarly, according to Boston Consulting Group, scaling up plant-based meat production has been identified as the single most effective action that climate investors can take, 7 times more effective than investing in green buildings and 11 times more than zero-emission cars. But as clear as the scientific case is that alternative proteins are essential to meet the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement, a shift towards alternative proteins is not inevitable. Even though food and agriculture account for 1/3 of all global emissions, to date, the sector has received less than 5% of the climate financing. According to a global innovation needs assessment by Climate Works Foundation and the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, unlocking the full benefits of alternative proteins will require increasing global public investment for R&D and commercialization to at least 4.4 and 5.7 billion US dollars per year. That may sound like a lot until you see that McKinsey analysts have projected that by 2050, the alternative protein sector could generate over 700 billion US dollars annually in economic growth. But where that money will ultimately go is still up for grabs. To discuss how countries can create the innovation ecosystems needed to capitalize on this enormous economic and climate mitigation opportunity, I'm delighted to be joined by 4 leaders from across the agri-food space. Professor Huang, Deputy Head of the Department of Food Science and Technology at NUS in Singapore and part of the new Basel Center for Sustainable Proteins. Professor Fan, Dean of the Academy of Global Food Economics and Policy at China Agricultural University and board member of CGIAR. Professor Germano from the Federal University of Parana here in Brazil. And Marian Adeney, Director of Amazon and Fire Programs at Conservation X Labs. So panelists, please join me on stage. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to start with Marian. So the Amazon has long been referred to as the lungs of the planet, but continues to face challenges in balancing agricultural production with forest conservation. From your perspective, how is the situation evolving on the ground?
Hello. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the invitation to speak on this panel. I'm really honored to be here with my colleagues, and I expect to learn a lot in today's discussion. And thank you also for that introduction and really setting that global stage. I wanted to add to your first point about not being able to achieve our climate goals without a food transition, which is really true. And I think another thing that's absolutely true is that we can't achieve our climate goals without a living healthy Amazon. And these two issues are extremely closely linked. The Amazon, as many of you know, is somewhere close to 20%, 18 to 20% deforested at this point, with large areas of land either used for low-intensity cattle production or abandoned lands. And the causes of deforestation are complex, but at the end of the day, about 90% of deforested lands end up as either cattle pastures or areas that will be growing feed for plant-based food.
Feed for animals.
Yes,
right? Yeah.
feed for animals, sorry. Feed as an input for plant-based food, feed for animals. And there are a lot of interacting factors that go into this. So just to give a little bit of an overview of how the Amazon impacts the agriculture and the rest of the South America and the world. Many of you also know that the Amazon is a source of transpiration, which creates what we call flying rivers that are aerial water that is transpired from the forest into the atmosphere and then actually moves down the continent to feed the agricultural breadbasket of the rest of South America. So the fate of South American agriculture is also linked to the Amazon. And then we also have the issue of fire, where clearing forest for agriculture and renewing, they call renewing pasture lands, is done with fire. And with interactions between climate, drought, and fire getting stronger and stronger, we're seeing that fire-based land management that is firmly rooted in these agricultural processes is accelerating this cycle. So we're caught in this feedback cycle of deforestation for many reasons, but that ends up mostly for cattle. And cattle are like money in the bank. So cattle are a very easy, low investment strategy for smallholders on the ground. And then fire, resulting in reduced rainfall that can reduce agricultural production. So we're not going to be able to get out of this feedback cycle without rethinking how we manage our food systems.
And how we produce meat, right? So people often assume that conventional meat producers see alternative proteins as a threat, as a competition. But in my personal conversations with conventional meat companies, that is often not the case. The 6 biggest meat companies have all invested in alternative proteins, either have their own plant-based products or they invested in cultivated meat. So, Professor Germano, how do you see that? What do you see here on the ground in Brazil?
Thank you, Mirte. This is an excellent question, since Brazil is a major producer and consumer of animal protein, right? Therefore, it makes sense. It is like challenging to ask to meat producers and processors, how do they see the emerging alternative protein sector? And I can think about this in considering two parts of the meat value chain. For instance, regarding meat processing companies, we already have companies in Brazil that are investing in research centers for alternative protein cultivated meat, have developed like agreements with cultivated meat startups, and also are leading producers of plant-based meat and foods in Brazil. But going to another part of the value chain, thinking about the producers, is another story. Therefore, we conducted a research in our state. My state is Parana, where is our university, which is a major producer of meat through cooperatives. And we conducted a research on how do they perceive cultivated meat And this one is being published in a peer-reviewed journal, and was very interesting to understand that. We were able to ask to the 19 cooperatives that produce animal protein in the state of Parana how they perceive that. Of course, there's a methodology, very complex and things like that, but the results came out with very insightful and interesting information. First, we identified several groups. That method allows us to identify several groups. There's a group of marketing enthusiasts. There's a group of cooperatives, animal proteins, cooperatives that see opportunities to add value to their businesses, perhaps to focus on a niche, or perhaps to identify other ways to diversify their protein portfolio. There are also the technological innovators, which are like farmers that want to be updated. There were also a group of farmers that are more like concerned about the environmental aspects and the environmental appeal of their products. The strongest group was the first, with the greatest identity. However, we have also a group of cooperatives, of meat producers, that actually don't know very well what all of this is about. It was not possible to group them in a specific category. That was very interesting, because some see it as a threat and others don't have a specific opinion. The takeaways are two. There is more need for sustainability information with producers, and also to more information about the opportunities and how they can diversify their protein production, also adopting alternative proteins. Thank you.
Thanks for that reflection. Now, let's turn to Asia, which is home to several world-class hubs of alternative protein innovation, anchored by strong research institutions. So, Professor Huang, Singapore is often cited as a model for how government, academia, and industry can come together to accelerate food innovation. So, what elements from the Singapore ecosystem have been most critical, you think, in enabling that ecosystem?
Thank you very much for this difficult question to answer. Yeah, as some of you may have been here in the morning, you learned quite a bit of Singapore government's positions on food security, on four pillars, and I think one major effort that the government have been investing is actually grow locally. And so grow locally, Singapore, as you know, over 90% of the food are imported from 180 some countries all over the world, including Brazil. And but to solve this, there were huge research gaps we need to do. So government invested heavily under this Singapore food story, because as some of you may know, Singapore solved the water problem very successfully. The Singapore water story have been really the role model of water security. And now Singapore government is quite ambitious to solve these food security issues. So Singapore Food Security Grant has been 1.0, 2.0, now it's Singapore Food Security 3.0. So government have been investing over 300 million Singapore dollars and more to come in this space, including alternative protein. We don't call it alternative protein, I think we use sustainable protein, which we're really thankful for Beizhou's Earth Fund to pick National University of Singapore to be the only sustainable protein center in Asia, which actually synergistically work together with the government investment, and then we bring together the multidisciplinary experts in Singapore, which under this Beizhou Center, we have over close to 30 principal investigators that covers all disciplinary, including food safety, nutrition scientists, and then we have consumer studies, and as well as like technology-wise, including plant-based proteins and cultivated meat, as well as microalgae. So all these experts work together synergistically, thanks to the Bezos Earth Fund, and government's investment really make the whole academic industry work very closely to actually to deliver the missions set by Bezos Center, which is to commercialize the ultimate protein, which actually were defined, including price parity, of course, and then has to be safe, nutritionally superior, as well as to the taste bud of the consumers of diverse requirements. It's a humongous challenge, but I think we are excited. We have been making a lot of progress over the past few years. And of course, I mentioned government and charity organization really are the major financial source for this development. But we also see industry actually come into the picture, including we're collaborating with, for example, Amway, who is the major protein marketeers to invest in us. And with the Bezos Center, I think the visibility is very high, so we attract lots of industry interest to partner with us. I think that's how government, charity organization, and the industry work together with a group of researchers in different disciplinaries to deliver the ultimate proteins eventually.
Thank you so much, Professor. Singapore has definitely taken a leadership approach, being the first country on earth to approve cultivated meat product, putting in a lot of money through the Singapore Food Story R&D program, but also through their Sovereign Wealth Fund, Temasek, investing in like pilot facilities and all that. And Singapore has been really well known for that and applauded in the media for that, rightly so. But there's much less known to people who are not based in China about what's happening actually in China. And we would love to hear from you, Professor Fan. Can you share a bit more about how Chinese universities are advancing alternative protein research and innovation? Because once China comes on board, well, then that's a force to reckon with.
Well, first, let me thank the GIF Asian Pacific and the Singaporean Pavilion for organizing this very important discussion. So we have been lots of pavilions on energy, renewable energy, deforestation, but I think zooming in on the alternative protein is so important. So first, I wanted to let you know that in China, we are facing a dietary crisis. So we are eating so badly. We used to eat lots of plant-based food, but today we're transitioning to very much westernized, meat-heavy diets. So that has caused environmental issues and health issues. So many people now overweight, obese, are experiencing sort of chronic health crisis, diabetes, heart attacks, and beyond. Then environmentally, obviously, China is facing shortage of water, shortage of land has been degraded, and obviously the carbon emissions. So what do we do? So in the past, China has very much focused on supply side, on the production side. But today, it is time to look at the consumption side, to look at our diets. So how do we eat? I think, obviously, promoting more plant-based diets. For example, tofu. You have tried a tofu, right? Bean products. That's a traditional Chinese food, at least in my region, in Jiangsu province. We used to eat lots of beans. But today, we give that up. So we need to eat more beans directly, like what the Brazilian is doing. But then I think the alternative protein could be another important solution, not the only solution. as a part of the solution. So yes, indeed, China is investing quite a bit. Just give you an overall picture. The Chinese agriculture research investment, total investment, is bigger than US, Brazil, India combined. Huge investment. So every year for the last 10 years, agriculture R&D in China is growing at 8%, 9%, even 10% per year. I came back to China 6 years ago, been in US for 35 years, and I have seen so many investments going to agriculture research and so many innovations coming out. But it's not just the total amount, it's a priority. So can China invest a bit more on the consumption side? That's alternative proteins. There are some already. So for example, the cell meat, cultivated meat from Nanjing Agricultural University. Actually, I graduated from there almost 50 years ago, 45 years ago. Even in my own university, it's more, so first they focus on plant-based food. So not cell protein will take some time. So plant-based. So using the beans to imitate meat. To me, that represents much greater potential in the next 5 years to 10 years. We cannot wait for the cell meat to be marketable. It will take another 5 or 10 years. We simply cannot wait. If we wanted to help to improve our diet, if we wanted to help to reduce the carbon emissions. So in China, I think the first priority is to look at plant-based alternative proteins. We have seen some products. By the way, I think maybe 6 or 7 patents among 20 patents globally on alternative proteins. They came from China. So you see lots of innovations coming there. Now, some challenges. One is how can we really convert all these innovations to real market opportunities? That's number one issue. Related to that, it is a consumer's acceptance. Consumers' acceptance. Again, we do see a great potential, but we need to convert that potential to reality. And then obviously the regulations, policies. So here, I think we can work with Singapore, maybe with other countries to really unlock some of the regulatory challenges. For example, by working with WHO, FAO on Codex. Because right now, simply they have not taken that into consideration. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And that's a perfect bridge to my next question for Professor Germano, because you are actually working on the intersection of academia and industry. Right? So how do Brazilian universities work with startups, with companies to actually bring these products to market?
Okay, thank you so much for the question. We have several universities, public and some private, but also research institutions. I would like to mention Embrapa, the Brazilian Agriculture Research Organization, and also Itaú in São Paulo, which is the technological food technology. Well, I don't remember very well the translation, but they are focused in food technology. And they have developed many fronts in this area. I would like to start with a very tangible, concrete example of a startup called Amazonica Mundi. Amazonica Mundi, you already can find in the supermarket. It uses Amazonian ingredients. It also uses cashew fiber, which is a fruit in Brazil, in northeastern North Brazil, for plant-based products. Therefore, there is a circularity because cashew is used for juice, for instance. In this case, fiber is used by Amazonica Mundi. They also use açaí extract, babaçu, and other ingredients from the Amazon. Some of them come from traditional extractivist communities, and also there is a traceability mechanism. And Embrapa helped Amazonica Mundi testing functionalities, the chemical aspects of those ingredients, and helped to support the development of the product. Another interesting case is a company called Future Call. Future Call is a startup in Brazil that produces milk protein through precision fermentation. It is still scaling up. And we also have other universities like studying other byproducts that can be used in fermentation, bioprocess optimization. Other have studied new microorganisms. And also I would like to mention, Mirte, the Biome project, which is led by the Good Food Institute Brazil and involves several institutes, research institutes, and universities in Brazil, which are trying to identify specific ingredients that can be used locally to produce alternative proteins. Therefore, they have studied, for instance, babaçu, which is a coconut from a palm tree, fungi from the Amazon region. But these are mostly exploratory research, but have addressed this involving university and the support of the Good Food Institute. And there are many studies regarding consumer acceptance, which is a key aspect of all of this. If consumers are not joining us, don't appreciate in Brazil the products we are producing, that gets very complicated, right? And therefore, these are a few examples that come to my mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing. We know that the private investments have kind of dried up for this sector, but we see a lot of interest from government, so lots of public funds going into this sector. We already talked about the Singapore food story. The latest iteration was 42 million Singapore dollars, spread over 11 projects. 9 of them were alternative proteins related. So still a lot of support from the Singapore government. How do you feel, Professor Huang, has this national investment shaped research and industry collaboration and contributed to the global effects of where the research on alternative proteins stands today?
Yeah, actually, I need to mention that our university, NUS, have invested 150 million Singapore dollars to build a building called Agriculture, Agri-Tech, Aqua-Tech, and Food Tech, so-called A2FT building. And so under this university investment plus the government investment and Bezos Fund, and our mission is to scale up our laboratory scale trials and R&Ds into pilot plant. So our A2FT building is exactly bridge the gap to commercialization. So I think with that investment into place, the building will be ready by 2027. And then we are going to set up this pilot scale, but it's SFA-approved facility where we integrate agriculture, aquaculture together with food tech, which means you link the farm together with this food manufacturing plant under one roof. So it eliminates lots of transportation costs and in between. And so I think that is the future agriculture and food production model we want to drive. And along the way, we actually nurture startup companies based on our innovation, based on our IPs generated under all these government funds and Bezos Earth Fund. And so we are nurturing these new high-tech companies to commercialize it. And of course, we also partner with multinational companies, particularly in Asian areas, so that we can get the resources, for example, from Malaysia, Indonesia, even and China and Korea. You know, we actually are collaborating with neighboring countries to quickly scale up any technology that are viable from our pilot scale. I think that's exciting to see our future is quite bright. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Marian, what do you believe are other key levers that governments can pull or deploy in order to build alternative protein ecosystems?
Yes, thank you for that question. And I'm going to keep this grounded in the Amazon, actually, since we're talking about the role of alternative proteins in creating a more climate livable future. The examples that Professor Germano gave from the Good Food Institute, which is doing incredible work here in Brazil on don't worry, on research for potential for actual native crops and Amazonian and Brazilian, not only Amazonian, but also Cerrado and other Brazilian biodiversity is incredible. The potential, I gave you kind of the dark side of the picture earlier. I want to go for the hopeful side now, which is the incredible potential for regenerative economies in the Amazon region. So consider 80% or more of Amazonian trees have either food or medicinal uses that are known by the incredible diversity of indigenous and traditional people that live in the Amazon. Also consider there's 17 million hectares of degraded land in Brazil that needs to be reforested in order to reach our climate goals. And you have the marriage of this opportunity, for example, with the types of things that Embrapa and the Good Food Institute are working on, where you can source ingredients for plant-based meats or alternative meats from native species that can be grown at larger scales in degraded areas. This is a win-win-win. At the same time, we have Amazonian state and national, Brazilian state and national governments really pushing towards creating more sustainable regenerative economies. And you have programs like school lunch programs and others that provide an opportunity for governments to source from local production and create an education campaign by putting these products in front of the plates of Amazonian people and other people, and really starting to create that public buy-in and understanding that alternative and sustainable proteins doesn't just mean for meat eaters, for example, that you're not going to be able to have your meat, which is something we hear a lot, but that we have many more options that are more healthy and more sustainable and can be part of both the dietary solutions that you mentioned, as well as the need to build these regenerative economies.
Thank you very much for those examples. Professor Fan, back to you. In China's latest 5-year plan, novel foods were already included, and preliminary recommendations for the next 5-year plan, which will be published early next year, point towards an even bigger focus on building the biomanufacturing sector, including novel food technologies. So do you think, will China replicate its success with EVs and solar panels that I already referred to in my presentation for alternative proteins?
Yeah, well, if you go to the Chinese pavilion just next door, every day they are discussing about e-vehicles, renewable energy. I really hope in 10 years they will discuss the food, alternative proteins, or the protein diversity. So I think how can we really replicate the success of EVs? One is obviously government support. There's no doubt the government is supporting that. As you already mentioned, in the next 5 years plan, they call it bioeconomy manufacturing. They call it bioeconomy manufacturing, which includes alternative proteins. So several funding agencies, including National Science Foundation, National Natural Science Foundation, they have put some grants in supporting that. Basic research, that's a science, basic research. Then from Ministries of Science and Technology, in their next 5 years plan, they also have sort of specifically allocated funding for that. Then the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs, as you also mentioned, they are more towards the adoption of the technologies. So we have seen, wow. Very strong, right? So I want to emphasize, yes, the government already recognize the importance. So that's good news. But the private sector has not moved very far. We have seen some smaller, maybe more focused companies here and there, but we don't see a big scale like EVs. Just for your information, well, obviously EV in China have taken a decade or two. Initially, lots of small companies competing each other and so on. But the real opportunity actually was Tesla. When Tesla came to China to invest, that's about maybe 5 years ago, maybe longer than that. That created such a competitive market in China. And Tesla also demanded all the parts for the e-vehicles in China. That created a whole value chain in China. So is it possible for another big international company to come China to invest that can bring the whole value chain? I don't know whether we can replicate. We are thinking about that. Then in terms of research, I think it's already there. I think that there's some Chinese scientists that are really working on that. So there's no doubt. I think the consumers' acceptance we all have mentioned is a big problem. The e-vehicles in China is more or less accepted by consumers. They are cheaper, easy to use, they look great. But for some sort of alternative proteins, it will take some time. Partly because China also had some food safety issues 5 or 10 years ago. Imitated or fake meat. So immediately they say, oh, this is another fake meat. It will be very difficult to convince the consumers. So that's why, as a social economist, we need to work on that to really unlock some of the consumers' concerns on the so-called fake meat, to really educate them, provide strong evidence information for consumers to accept. So, yes, I think e-vehicles example is there, but I think there are a couple of sort of differences or challenges that prevent the alternative proteins to become another e-vehicle in China.
So we need to build more trust. One thing that pops to my mind is I think it's pretty great that Singapore was the first country on earth to approve cultivated meat, because Singapore does hold the golden standard of food safety in our region, I think. And that is also a nice bridge to my next question to Professor Germano. So Brazil, like China, is another agricultural production powerhouse. But what do you see as the most promising entry points to cross-regional collaboration with a small R&D and regulatory hub like Singapore? Is it like maybe that stamp of approval of like food safety that you can take away from Singapore? And how would you like collaborate differently with a small country like Singapore and a like manufacturing giant like China?
Well, I think that let's make it more simple and think about 3 aspects: people, infrastructure, and biomanufacturing, bioprocesses, biotechnology. And the third is regulation, which is quite complicated. And the fourth is consumers. These are 3 areas that could be explored. But I think that the entry point, the easiest, should be, of course, people. Exchange knowledge and perhaps exchange some of our professional experts and students going to Singapore and to China. However, this is my view, the view of Professor Germano. I think that we have already advanced a lot in this people side, and it's time to start thinking about infrastructure, to exchange more in this regard. Last year, we had the opportunity to go to Singapore. It was excellent, fascinating. We talked with a lot of actors there. We keep talking. And in my view, these 2 areas come first. People, but manufacture, the infrastructure is a key now, strategic key. because we have seen startups in Brazil that advance a lot, for instance, fermentation, biomass fermentation, precision fermentation, that scale up until a pilot stage, but there is a lack of food-grade industrial scale facilities. Therefore, in my mind, we also have to be a little bit more ambitious in this cooperation, and therefore I will try to talk with you later. But I think this infrastructure gap is also that could be also addressed. Otherwise, most of our startups in Brazil will fly away or perhaps die in the valley, the death of the valley death in their development. Thus, I'm thinking about how to develop creative ways to have more cooperation in the infrastructure side. And regulation, of course, is very important, but it's the next stage. Thank you.
Thank you. So talking a little bit more about collaboration, Professor Huang, the Bezos Earth Fund has three centers, three Bezos Centers for Sustainable Proteins, one in Singapore, one in the UK, one in America. How did you kind of divide the work between the three centers, and how do you plan to collaborate between the three of them, but also into basically your own regional backyards?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, the three Bezos centers are actually communicating very closely through these academic events like workshops and then conferences. Actually, this year alone, in Singapore, we organized this international summit of sustainable plotting, and then we invited our peers from NC State as well as from Imperial College London to come to Singapore, and then we exchange ideas and how we work synergistically but complementary in a sense. In Singapore, our mission, our main emphasis is actually this microalgae plotting, plant plotting, as well as cultivated meat. And then in the UK, the main focus is on precision fermentation route to make proteins. And then, as far as I know, the NC State, I visited last year, and the main strength is to scaling up commercializations of this cultivated meat, because they already have the infrastructure in pilot scale, very nice bioreactors, and then they can actually solve this engineering problem. So I think all these three centers, we complement among ourselves, and then we also collaborate. For example, NC State side actually can take on some of our cultivated meat technology, maybe in that side, to scale up some of the scaffolds we make. They may use in cultivation processes, for example. I think we have been really collaborating very well in this regard. And I can foresee in the future we have more student exchanges, scholar exchanges, including sabbatical leave of our professors to the other two centers, or they can send experts to Singapore and work together to address some of the issues. And because our mission is the same, because we need to commercialize the ultimate plotting that is actually superior in terms of safety, nutrition, and price parity, as well as meet the consumer demand. Yeah, that's the common goal. So we work together in that regard. Thank you.
A common goal, but divided work tasks. So Professor Fan, China and Singapore are already working together, leading a new working group at the Codex Alimentarius on and should say that correctly, international safety guidelines for alternative proteins, specifically cultivated meat. do you think that partnership, like what are the ripple effects of China taking such a lead now together with Singapore and then South Korea and Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, I think the collaboration between Singapore and China has great potential. As you know, more than 70% of the Singaporeans are the ethnic Chinese. So if they begin to eat some sort of AP foods, alternative protein foods, then Chinese consumers will have more trust. We believe in that. And same for Taiwan or many other regions. So that's one good example. The other one is, I don't think Singapore will become a big manufacturing center. That has to be in Brazil or China. Brazil provides raw material. China is the biggest consumers. So in that collaboration, so for example, Singapore as an innovation center, as a leader in tackling some of the policy regulation issues, transparency, that will showcase Chinese consumers and obviously demand certain materials from Brazil. So I think the collaboration has to be like EV. EV would never happen in Singapore, such a small place, only innovation, right? Or maybe research. So I think future collaboration should go beyond just innovation research, because Brazil has research, China also has research. We can share, but more importantly is the division of labor. You showcase, the consumers actually do eat safe, healthy, sustainable foods. And Chinese definitely will look at that. Brazilians will also take a look on that. So I think instead of just sharing knowledge, collaboration, division of labor will be very critical. I think working with WHO and FAO on Codex, very critical, because in many countries they still do not accept any type of APs, whether it's plant-based, whether it's cultured meat. So we must work together. As far as by the way, the Chinese authority, food safety is very open on that. Data-based, evidence-based, quite open. By the way, we have organized 3 so-called World Agri Innovation Forum, WAFI. Every year, we always had a very strong session on alternative proteins. So we brought the Chinese policymakers, Chinese investors, Chinese companies, as well as Beijing City. So Beijing City is very interested, very excited about this opportunity. Every year they wanted to have a dialogue with international stakeholders, said, hey, how can we work together? They wanted to convert Beijing as an innovation hub on alternative proteins.
Fantastic. Can't wait to see more collaborations happening. If all of us come together, I think beautiful things can happen. Marian, so what role can global networks and global organizations like Conservation Ag Labs play in connecting innovators across the continents? And maybe you can also share a little bit more about the Perfect Protein Prize as an example of that.
Sure, yeah, thank you. And that was a great segue. I just wanted to first say, I love what you're saying, and I think that Brazil has the opportunity, working with places like Singapore and China, to become a leader in this globally critical emergent industry, and that Brazil can do this thoughtfully in a way that also helps to achieve climate and conservation goals in the Amazon, the Cerrado, and beyond, that also create sustainable livelihoods for Brazil's people. And so that's a really incredible opportunity, but it needs to be done thoughtfully and with attention to the structural, infrastructure, and regulatory and financial incentives. And before I go on to talk about innovation, just wanted to mention that, for example, less than 5% of rural credit in Brazil that goes to smallholders in the Amazon goes to agroforestry. It's almost all for cattle, soy, and other commodity crops. So when we think about building these new industries and these new economic trajectories, we need to think very carefully about these structural underpinnings that can incentivize things in one way or the other. So to get to your question about innovation, this is an area that I've also been working a lot on, thinking about the Amazon and thinking about Brazil and the need for science, technology, and innovation collaboration. Cross-border collaborations like the ones we're seeing on this panel, I think have an incredible potential for doing this and for getting also beyond places like Curitiba, Sao Paulo, Florianopolis, and into places like the deforestation frontier and small cities where there really isn't the economic opportunity to put some of these opportunities into practice. Besides that, when we're talking about actually doing the science and the innovation needed to move this industry, which is where you all are at the forefront, Conservation X Labs, our organization, also works a lot with the concept of open innovation, which is putting a problem out to the world and asking for people to solve it. Research dollars tend to be very tightly directed. Research labs have particular areas of focus and lines that they're going down. Open innovation works on the principle that good ideas can come from anyone, anywhere. We see examples like the babaçu palm plant-based meat, which was actually a winner in an open innovation competition that Conservation X Labs ran on replacement materials for harmful value chains. And so the Perfect Protein Prize is actually a larger global open innovation program that we're developing that asks, what are the barriers to having a protein product that could come from anything that gets over some of the taste, particularly the taste barriers, but also the cost parity and texture and other barriers that are really getting in the way of plant-based meats tasting like animal-based meats. So this is a program, a challenge that we've been developing together with the Good Food Institute and that we hope to launch sometime in the not too far future, where we would be asking for those solutions from anyone, anywhere. And we've had incredible success with these kind of programs, doing a couple things that I'll close with. Why would you use a program like that? One, because it really elevates the problem and kind of sets a level of ambition that we don't necessarily see in research. It breaks open the problem and asks for solutions from anybody. And we get incredible creative solutions that come sometimes from people that are not working in the field. And there's ways that we can incentivize international collaboration to do that. And that's one of the things we're working on. Another thing is that it has an incredible success rate for attracting follow-on investment. So in Conservation X Labs, we've run about 20 of these prizes and challenges, and collectively, our innovator teams that have won have a 40 times return on the dollar investment that we put into them through those prizes and challenges. So that's another reason, and I think just to close with this field in particular, we're seeing the lack of conversations about it. We need mechanisms that are high profile, high publicity, that can really bring the world and other sectors into this conversation, both with resources and with expertise and with ideas.
Wow, that's an incredible success story. Thanks so much for sharing. Really, really cool. To close off this panel, because I think we're kind of over time already a little bit, but could each of you select one action that you would like to see accelerated for the global transition towards sustainable proteins? Something realistic that could happen in maybe the next 2-3 years? What would it be? Maybe I'll start on that side. Professor Huang.
In the next 2 to 3 years, is it? Let me think. I think I really want to see a successful example of this ultimate protein defined by the Bezos Center's mission, which is superior in terms of safety, nutrition, price parity, and consumer acceptability. We need to have such a product that can be successfully launched. And that will become a kind of flagship achievement, and then many will follow out of that.
Professor
I think using modern technologies like AI, artificial intelligence, can really help. In my university, we already have some of the sort of AP product. For example, soy-based ice cream. Some of the soy-based. So we actually provide a buffet service to students. And students use the AI plate to pick up the food items. With each item they picked, then the machine will tell them the calorie, the fat, the proteins, and the carbon emissions. Automatically, students already begin to optimize their diets. So this is great opportunity for the next 2 or 3 years. If all the universities in China are equipped with the AI, maybe not just university, high schools, or all the public restaurants are equipped with AI equipment, and later the alternative proteins be part of the diets, that will help to transform our diets.
Well, I think two things come to my mind. First, I think we need more infrastructure like food-grade CDMOs to allow for startups to scale up to industrial and commercial levels. Another thing, I think that we need to see prices and costs decreasing. It's very important. But I think about this in a very radical way, thinking about alternative protein becoming available to low-income population as well. In this regard, I remember about a startup that I really appreciate, which is a nice case on this aspect, which is Essential in Ethiopia, that produces through fermentation proteins for malnutrition populations. I think it's fascinating. It is something that we should think more about.
Thank you. I'd like to see the conversation about alternative and sustainable proteins start to have more prominence in the conservation and climate communities, and particularly with an attention to what is the impact on the ground as we start to scale these technologies. And just to give a concrete example, there's a huge push right now in Brazil to start to scale commercial enterprises for reforestation with native plants. I'd like to see some of these products, like those we've mentioned, from the caju, the babasu, actually start to get incorporated into these reforestation schemes with financing to start to show that we can create sustainable value chains with these native products as part of a sustainable development and conservation plan for the Amazon and other biodiverse areas.
Thank you very much. So we need a poster product, AI, use AI. Professor Germano, help me out. We need to yeah, exactly. Sorry, I'm still jet lagged. We need to make sure that these products are available for lower incomes, and we need to make them locally available with local products, local ingredients. Well, if we're going to fix all of that in the next 2-3 years, we'll be very busy, but the future looks pretty bright. Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking the panel.
Thank you once again to all the panelists for the very meaningful and insightful session. May I invite everyone to remain on stage to receive a token of appreciation from Singapore Food Agency. So what you will be receiving is a set of Singapore Farm Forces keychain representing Singapore's 3 local produce, namely vegetables, fish, and eggs. Okay, take a group photo together. Thank you very much.